September 16, 1943. Bougainville, Solomon Islands. First Lieutenant Kenneth Walsh studied his hand as he recorded observations in his personal log, documenting what would become a turning point in Pacific air warfare. The new aircraft changes everything. Speed and firepower give us advantages the Zero cannot match. What we need now is better accuracy in lead-angle shooting. Through the scratched plexiglass of his F4U Corsair's canopy, Walsh had just returned from escorting Navy bombers, witnessing the difficulties that plagued even seasoned pilots. Striking a maneuvering target while both aircraft executed violent turns required mathematical calculations that human minds struggled to perform in fractions of a second. What Walsh and thousands of other Marine and Navy aviators could not yet know was that British engineers had already cracked this problem. A device incorporating spinning gyroscopes and precision mirrors would soon transform aerial gunnery from an art requiring years of experience into a science that could be learned in weeks. The Mark 18 gyroscopic gunsight would reach the Pacific theater within 12 months, fundamentally altering the geometry of air combat. The Vought F4U Corsair had entered combat in February 1943, bringing unprecedented speed and firepower to marine aviation. Powered by the Pratt & Whitney Air 2800 double wasp engine producing over 2,000 horsepower, the Corsair could surpass 400 miles per hour, making it the first American single-engine fighter to break that barrier. Its 6 Browning M2 machine guns, each firing .50 caliber ammunition at nearly 800 rounds per minute, delivered devastating firepower when rounds struck home. The challenge was making those bullets connect. Deflection shooting, the art of hitting a moving target from a moving platform, represented the most difficult aspect of aerial combat. When a Corsair traveling at 400 miles per hour attempted to fire at a Zero performing evasive maneuvers at 300 miles per hour, the pilot had to aim not where the enemy was, but where he would be when the bullets arrived. Those rounds, leaving the guns at about 2,700 feet per second, still required time to reach their mark. At 500 yards, that time approached half a second. In that span, a Zero in a standard rate turn could move nearly 200 feet. The pilot had to lead the target by exactly that amount, adjusting constantly as ranges and angles changed, all while pulling G-forces that narrowed vision and rendered complex calculations nearly impossible. The Mark 8 reflector sight, standard equipment on Corsairs through 1943 and early 1944, offered no help with this core problem. It projected a simple illuminated aiming mark onto a glass plate, nothing more than a fixed reference showing where the guns were pointed. The pilot had to judge lead angle purely through experience and instinct. Skilled pilots learned the feel for deflection shooting after long practice. Many flyers never acquired that feel at all, consistently firing behind enemy aircraft and wasting ammunition that had traveled 6,000 miles across the Pacific. Lieutenant Kenneth Walsh, flying with VMF 124, had mastered deflection shooting through repetition and natural ability. On May 13, 1943, he became the first Corsair ace by downing 3 Japanese fighters, raising his total to 6 confirmed victories. Walsh had learned to anticipate target motion, to sense the proper lead angle, to fire at the instant when geometry and instinct aligned. His success came from hundreds of hours of training and an inherent grasp of three-dimensional motion. Most pilots lacked Walsh's gifts. The average Marine aviator arrived in the combat zone with perhaps 200 total flight hours and maybe 20 hours of gunnery practice against towed targets that flew straight and level, nothing like maneuvering Zeros flown by veteran Japanese pilots. These average pilots struggled to score hits. Combat records from 1943 show that many flyers expended all their ammunition without notching a single victory, their rounds passing harmlessly behind the target because mental calculations were fractions of a second too slow. The British had recognized this issue early in the war. In 1941, Fanti began producing the Mk2 Eurosight, a revolutionary device that used spinning gyroscopes to automatically compute deflection angles. Gyroscopes resist changes in orientation. When an aircraft turns, the gyroscopes inside the sight remain pointed in their original direction while the airplane rotates around them. By measuring this resistance through precision gears and mirrors, the sight determined the aircraft's rate of turn. That turn rate directly corresponded to the lead angle required to hit a target. The sight then adjusted the aiming reticle automatically, moving it ahead of the enemy aircraft by the correct amount. Royal Air Force pilots using the Mk2 Eurosight reported dramatic increases in accuracy. Spitfire pilots who had struggled with deflection shooting suddenly found themselves hitting targets on their first burst. The sight removed the need for complex mental estimates, allowing pilots to focus on tactics and positioning instead of trigonometry. The United States grasped the technology's potential immediately and contracted the Sperry Gyroscope Company to produce American versions. The U.S. Army Air Forces designated theirs the K-14, while the Navy and Marine Corps adopted the Mark 18. Both were essentially identical to the British model, with minor adjustments for American manufacturing and cockpit layouts. Sperry's facility in Lake Success, New York, employed over 20,000 workers at peak production, turning out gyroscopic sights alongside bomb sights, fire control systems, and navigation equipment. The Mark 18 was significantly bulkier than the simple reflector sight it replaced. Where the Mark 8 weighed about 5 pounds, the gyroscopic system weighed 12 and required major cockpit modifications. Sperry engineers noted that the size was unavoidable. Inside the housing were 2 independent gyroscopes measuring pitch and yaw, spinning continuously once powered. These gyroscopes were the key to solving the most challenging aspect of aerial gunnery. The Mark 18's design incorporated lessons from British combat experience. The sight featured 2 separate reticles. On the left, a fixed crosshair indicated where the guns were actually aligned. On the right, a gyro-stabilized reticle, a central circle surrounded by 6 diamond-shaped pips, displayed the computed aiming point. As the pilot tracked a target, the gyroscopic reticle automatically positioned itself ahead of the enemy by the correct lead angle. Pilot procedure became vastly simpler. First, he selected the target's wingspan using a control on the sight, choosing from known Japanese aircraft dimensions. The A6M0, the most common opponent, had a wingspan of 36 feet for standard models. With wingspan set, the pilot used a twist grip on the throttle to expand or contract the ranging reticle until it matched the apparent width of the target. This mechanically set the range, informing the sight's ballistic computer how far away the enemy was and how much bullet drop to compensate for. With range and wingspan entered, the gyroscopes did the rest. As the pilot maneuvered, the moving reticle adjusted itself to the exact lead angle required. All the pilot had to do was place that computed reticle on the target and fire. The rounds would land precisely where the sight predicted, regardless of the complexity of the maneuver. Production of the K-14 and Mark 18 began in earnest during spring 1944. The U.S. Army Air Force received priority for European theater operations with P-51 Mustangs and P-47 Thunderbolts receiving K-14 installations beginning in August 1944. The Navy and Marine Corps followed closely with F4U Corsair and F6F Hellcats scheduled for Mark 18 retrofits through fall and winter 1944. The first Corsair squadrons to receive the Mark 118 were those preparing for carrier operations. VMF 124 and VMF 213, the first Marine fighter squadrons assigned to fleet carriers, received their gyroscopic sights during training at Naval Air Station Santa Barbara in late 1944. The squadrons would join USS Essex in December, bringing the Corsair into carrier-based combat for the first time. Lieutenant Robert McClure, flying with the reformed VMF 214, received his Mark 18 equipped Corsair in early 1945. McClure had scored several victories during 1944 using the standard reflector sight, but he immediately recognized the gyroscopic sight's revolutionary potential. In a letter to his family, later preserved in Marine Corps archives, McClure wrote that the Mark 18 represented the difference between skilled guesswork and mechanical certainty. The device compressed years of experience into a few hours of training. Japanese naval aviation intelligence first became aware of American gyroscopic gunsight technology in late 1944 through analysis of recovered Corsair wreckage and interrogation of captured documents. What they discovered alarmed them profoundly. Technical specifications confirmed that Americans had developed a fire control system that largely eliminated human error in deflection shooting. Japanese tacticians understood immediately that this technological advantage could not be countered through improved training or modified tactics. The mathematical precision of gyroscopes spinning thousands of times per minute could not be matched by human reflexes, no matter how experienced the pilot. Japanese fighters had survived thus far by exploiting their superior maneuverability to force American pilots into difficult deflection shots where human calculation errors provided some margin of safety. Against Mark 18 equipped Corsairs, that margin vanished. Any American pilot who could track a Japanese fighter long enough to set range would score a hit regardless of the complexity of the maneuvering involved. Tactical modifications were ordered across all Japanese naval aviation units. Japanese fighters were instructed to avoid prolonged turning engagements with Corsairs at all costs. The new doctrine emphasized hit and run attacks, diving from altitude to make a single pass before extending away at maximum speed. This tactical shift acknowledged an uncomfortable reality that Japanese pilots could no longer rely on maneuverability alone to survive against technologically superior gunsights. December 1944 brought a significant milestone in Corsair operations. VMF 124, commanded by Major William Gizer, became the first Marine fighter squadron to operate from a fleet carrier when they joined USS Essex at Uli. VMF 213 joined simultaneously, bringing 48 F4U Corsair to carrier operations. Both squadrons were equipped with Mark 18 gyroscopic gunsights, representing the cutting edge of American aviation technology. The Essex Air Group sorted in January 1945 for strikes against Formosa and the Philippines. Marine Corps air pilots flew combat air patrol, bomber escort, and strike missions, finally bringing the F4U into the carrier-based role for which it had originally been designed. The Mark 18 proved invaluable during these operations. Pilots engaging Japanese interceptors reported significantly improved hit rates compared to their previous experiences with reflector sights. Combat action reports from January and February 1945 document numerous instances where pilots achieved kills with their initial burst, a level of first-pass success that had been uncommon with earlier sighting systems. The difference was most apparent during bomber escort missions where Corsairs maintained formation positions that often prevented ideal attack geometries. The Mark 118's ability to calculate accurate deflection from any angle transformed these constrained engagements into opportunities rather than disadvantages. Pilots no longer needed to maneuver into perfect 6 o'clock positions. They could engage from deflection angles that would have been impractical with reflector sights. February 1945 brought the invasion of Uoma, where Marine Corsair provided continuous air cover for the assault force. Multiple Marine squadrons flew from escort carriers, maintaining combat air patrols over the invasion fleet and supporting ground operations. The Mark 118 equipped aircraft demonstrated their effectiveness during defensive missions against Japanese air attacks. Pilots intercepting incoming raids consistently achieved kills at ranges and angles that would have been difficult with older sighting systems. The gyroscopic sight's automatic deflection calculation allowed pilots to engage multiple targets in rapid succession, where a pilot with a reflector sight might have expended all ammunition on a single difficult target. Mark 18 equipped pilots could achieve hits on 2 or 3 targets during the same engagement, conserving ammunition and multiplying their effective combat power. Squadron commanders noted in operational reports that less experienced pilots were achieving combat effectiveness comparable to veterans, primarily due to the improved fire control provided by the gyroscopic sight. March 1945 saw the continuation of carrier operations against the Japanese home islands. VMF 214 aboard USS Franklin participated in strikes against Japanese airfields and installations. On March 19, 1945, Franklin was hit by a Japanese bomber while operating off Kyushu. The resulting explosions and fires killed over 700 men aboard the carrier, including 32 members of VMF 214. The squadron suffered devastating casualties, but the survivors continued operations after the Franklin limped to safety. The disaster highlighted both the dangers of carrier aviation and the courage of the pilots who flew these missions. Despite the losses, Marine Corsair squadrons continued their mission, providing air cover and strike capability for the fleet. April 1945 brought Operation Iceberg, the invasion of Okinawa. This campaign would witness the most intensive kamikaze attacks of the war, with Japanese forces throwing thousands of aircraft against the American fleet in desperate attempts to halt the invasion. Marine Corsairs equipped with Mark 18 sights played a crucial role in defending against these attacks. The gyroscopic sight proved particularly effective against kamikaze aircraft, which flew predictable attack profiles that made range estimation and deflection calculation straightforward. Pilots could acquire incoming kamikazes, set range using the sight's ranging reticle, and achieve first burst hits with regularity that would have been impossible with reflector sights. Combat air patrol missions during April through June 1945 resulted in hundreds of Japanese aircraft destroyed, while precise statistics specifically attributing kills to Mark 18 equipped aircraft versus those with reflector Sites are not available in declassified records. Operational reports consistently noted improved combat effectiveness among squadrons that had received the gyroscopic sights. The psychological impact on Japanese pilots who survived encounters with Mark 18 equipped Corsairs extended beyond simple tactical disadvantage. The experience of being hit, regardless of evasive maneuvering, of watching tracers curve through the air with unnatural accuracy, created a sense of technological helplessness that traditional training had not prepared them for. Post-war interviews with Japanese aviators revealed that many identified advanced American fire control systems as among the most demoralizing technologies they faced. The certainty of being hit once an American pilot achieved a tracking solution eliminated the hope that had sustained Japanese fighter pilots through increasingly desperate circumstances. Maneuverability could no longer save them. Experience provided no advantage, and the only escape was to avoid engagement entirely, a tactical impossibility when defending against attacking bombers or protecting their own surface forces. The Mark 18's technical operation represented a remarkable achievement in mechanical computing. The system operated without electronics, using purely mechanical linkages, gears, and mirrors to perform calculations that would challenge a trained mathematician. The gyroscope spun continuously once the sight was powered, maintaining their orientation in space through conservation of angular momentum. As the aircraft maneuvered, the gyroscope housings rotated relative to the stable gyroscope rotors. Precision gears measured this relative motion, translating it into mirror movements that repositioned the aiming reticle. The entire system operated with tolerances measured in thousandth of an inch. Manufactured using the most advanced machining techniques available in 1944, Sperry's production facilities represented the pinnacle of American precision manufacturing. Each Mark 118 required dozens of individual components machined to exacting specifications. The gyroscopes themselves were masterpieces of miniaturization, spinning bearings that had to operate smoothly under sustained hygiene, maneuvering without binding or failing. Quality control procedures tested each sight extensively before delivery. Test stands simulated aircraft maneuvering, verifying that the sight correctly computed deflection angles across a range of turn rates and target ranges. Sights that failed these tests were returned for adjustment or rebuilding. The manufacturing challenge was not just producing the sights, but producing them in sufficient quantities to equip thousands of aircraft across multiple theaters. Sperry ramped up production throughout 1944, training workers in the specialized skills required for precision optical and mechanical assembly. The Mark 118 benefited from American mass production techniques while maintaining the quality standards necessary for a precision instrument. Parts were designed for interchangeability, allowing sights to be assembled from components manufactured at different facilities. This modularity also simplified maintenance and repair in forward areas. If a sight failed in combat, technicians could replace individual components rather than the entire unit. Spare parts were stocked at maintenance facilities throughout the Pacific, ensuring minimal downtime for aircraft requiring sight replacement. The integration of the Mark 118 into Corsair cockpits required careful attention to ergonomics. The sight had to be positioned where the pilot could easily view it while maintaining situational awareness. The throttle-mounted range adjustment had to be accessible without requiring the pilot to remove his hand from primary flight controls. Engineers worked with experienced combat pilots to refine the installation, incorporating feedback about what worked and what created difficulties during high-stress combat maneuvering. The result was a system that pilots could operate intuitively without needing to divert attention from tactical decision-making. Training programs were developed to teach pilots how to use the Mark 118 effectively. The training emphasized understanding what the sight was showing and how to interpret its indications. Pilots learned to recognize when the sight had stabilized after violent maneuvers, when to trust the computed reticle, and how to quickly set range using the diamond-shaped ranging pattern. Ground school instruction covered the basic principles of gyroscopic deflection computation without overwhelming pilots with mathematical theory. The goal was practical proficiency rather than engineering understanding. Pilots needed to know how to operate the sight, not how to design one. Flight training included practice intercepts against target aircraft, allowing pilots to experience how the sight behaved during actual Tracking situations. Instructors emphasized the importance of smooth tracking since erratic maneuvering could cause the gyroscopes to momentarily lose accuracy. The Mark 118 worked best when the pilot maintained steady pursuit, allowing the gyroscopes to measure consistent turn rates. Training also covered the sight's limitations. The gyroscopes required several seconds to stabilize after violent maneuvers. If a pilot executed a sudden reversal, the sight's reticle would lag briefly before reacquiring accurate deflection information. Experienced pilots learned to anticipate these limitations, timing their attacks to coincide with periods when the sight had achieved stable operation. Despite these minor limitations, the Mark 118 represented a quantum leap forward in fire control technology. Pilots who had struggled with deflection shooting using reflector sights found themselves achieving hits with regularity that had previously seemed impossible. The sight didn't make aerial combat easy, but it removed one of the most difficult variables from the equation. Combat remained dangerous and demanding, requiring tactical judgment, situational awareness, and skilled flying. But the actual act of shooting, the moment when trigger met target, had become more predictable, more reliable, and more lethal. The cumulative impact of the Mark 118 on Corsair operations in 1945 is difficult to quantify precisely from available records. Official statistics document that F4U Corsairs achieved an overall kill ratio of 11-1 during World War II with 2,140 air combat victories against 189 losses to enemy aircraft across 64,051 operational sorties. These figures represent the combined results of aircraft equipped with both reflector sights and gyroscopic sights across the entire war, separating the specific contribution of the Mark 118 from other factors would require access to detailed combat action reports that remain classified or unavailable. What can be documented is the consistent testimony of pilots who flew with both sight types. These pilots uniformly reported that the Mark 118 made deflection shooting more reliable and less dependent on natural ability. Anecdotal evidence from squadron records, pilot memoirs, and operational summaries indicates that the gyroscopic sight provided significant practical advantages in combat. The Mark 118 program represented American technological and industrial capability at its peak. The device incorporated cutting-edge gyroscopic technology, precision optics, and mechanical computing, all packaged in a form that could withstand the brutal environment of combat aviation. It was manufactured in quantities sufficient to equip thousands of aircraft, distributed across a global supply chain and maintained in forward areas by technicians working under primitive conditions. The program succeeded not because of any single brilliant innovation but because the entire system functioned effectively. British scientists identified the principle. American engineers adapted the design for mass production. American industry manufactured the units in volume and American logistics delivered them where they were needed. The Mark 118 exemplified the systematic approach to military technology that characterized American war production. The Japanese perspective on the Mark 118 and similar Allied fire control technologies evolved in the post-war decades as former aviators published memoirs and participated in historical analyses. The universal conclusion was that American fire control technology had rendered Japanese tactical doctrine increasingly ineffective by late 1944 and early 1945. A maneuverable fighter, piloted by well-trained aviators, could not compete against aircraft equipped with systems that calculated deflection automatically. Japanese post-war aviation development reflected these lessons learned. The Japan Self-Defense Force, established in the 1950s, emphasized advanced avionics and weapons systems over aircraft maneuverability. The pilots who had survived combat against Mark 118 equipped Corsairs understood that future aerial warfare would be decided primarily by technology rather than individual skill alone. The Corsair itself continued in service long after World War II ended. Marine squadrons flew F4Us during the Korean War from 1950 to 1953. Providing close air support for ground forces and flying interdiction missions. Many of these aircraft retained their Mark 18 gyroscopic sights throughout their operational lives. The technology That seemed revolutionary in 1944 had become standard equipment by 1950. Unremarkable and expected. This normalization of technological sophistication characterized the post-war era. Capabilities that would have been considered impossible in 1940 were routine by 1950 and obsolete by 1960. The transformation of aerial gunnery from art to science, accelerated by the Mark 18's introduction, reached its logical conclusion with guided missiles that required no pilot aiming whatsoever. Air-to-air missiles, first deployed operationally in the 1950s, eliminated even the requirement that a pilot maneuver his aircraft to point his weapons at the target. The progression from reflector sights to gyroscopic sights to radar-guided missiles occurred in less than 15 years, a pace of technological change unprecedented in military aviation history. By the time American pilots flew missions over Vietnam in the 1960s, the Mark 18's gyroscopic principles had been incorporated into far more sophisticated fire control computers. These systems integrated radar ranging, automatic lead computation, ballistic calculation, and target identification into unified packages that bore little resemblance to the mechanical computer of 1944. Yet the fundamental principle remained identical to what the Mark 18 had pioneered. Measure the platform's motion. Using gyroscopes, calculate the required lead angle, and present that information to the pilot in a form that made accurate shooting possible. The statistical record of World War II. Corsair operations provides context for understanding the Mark 18's role in Pacific air combat. Marine and Navy Corsair squadrons flew tens of thousands of sorties against Japanese forces from 1943 through 1945. They achieved the 11-to-1 kill ratio that established the Corsair as one of the war's most successful fighters. This success resulted from multiple factors working in combination. The Corsair's speed advantage over Japanese fighters allowed pilots to control engagement geometry, choosing when to fight and when to disengage. Its rugged construction meant it could absorb battle damage that would have destroyed lighter Japanese aircraft. Its heavy armament delivered overwhelming firepower when bullets connected with targets. The Mark 18 gyroscopic sight amplified these existing advantages by making it easier to deliver the Corsair's firepower accurately. The sight didn't create the Corsair's superiority, but it enhanced what was already a formidable weapon system. Pilot quality remained crucial. The Mark 18 helped pilots shoot accurately, but it didn't teach them tactics, situational awareness, or judgment. These skills still required experience and instruction. What the sight did was compress the learning curve for one specific task, deflection shooting, that had previously demanded extensive practice to master. The broader historical context shows that the Mark 18 was one element within a wider pattern of American technological dominance in the Pacific War. Radar systems provided early warning and intercept coordination. Radio communications enabled synchronized operations. Proximity-fused anti-aircraft shells created protective envelopes around ships. Each technology individually supplied advantages. Together, they formed a synergistic network the Japanese military could not equal. The Mark 18 fit naturally into this larger framework. It wasn't a miracle weapon that single-handedly won the air war. It was a practical enhancement in fire control that made already capable aircraft even more effective. Its contribution was incremental rather than revolutionary. But that incremental improvement, multiplied across thousands of aircraft and tens of thousands of engagements, produced substantial cumulative results. The legacy of the Mark 18 extended beyond its direct combat role. The sight's creation required unprecedented cooperation between scientists, engineers, and frontline pilots. Theoretical physics guided gyroscope design, manufacturing engineers solved production obstacles, pilot feedback drove continuous refinements. This collaborative method became a template for later weapons development. The procurement process also established important precedents. Instead of inventing an entirely new system from scratch, the United States recognized British innovation and adapted it for American mass production. This willingness to incorporate foreign technology when advantageous demonstrated a pragmatic approach that benefited U.S. aviation throughout the Cold War and beyond. The production methods developed for the Mark 18 had lasting influence beyond the device itself. Sperry's modular assembly techniques, where multiple facilities produced interchangeable components, enabled the high output levels that gave American forces their technological advantage. These approaches were later applied to radar sets, aircraft engines, and eventually electronics, creating an industrial base capable of producing complex, precision equipment at scales no other nation could match. The pilots who flew with Mark 18 sights represented a distinct generation, transitioning from instinctive gunnery to more systematically assisted combat. Many continued their military careers, piloting jets in Korea and serving in staff roles where they shaped tactics around the new capabilities offered by advanced fire control systems. Lieutenant Kenneth Walsh, who had become the first Corsair ace in 1943 using only a reflector sight and natural talent, ended the war with 21 confirmed kills. He received the Medal of Honor for actions on August 15, 1943. When he attacked a superior formation of Japanese aircraft despite damage to his own Corsair. Walsh survived the war, remained in the Marine Corps until retirement, and eventually rose to the rank of lieutenant colonel. His career spanned the transformation from instinct-based aerial combat to technology-assisted engagement, from aircraft armed with machine guns to those carrying guided missiles. Walsh's experience reflected the broader evolution of 20th-century air warfare. Lieutenant Robert McClure, who flew with the reformed VMF-214 in 1945, finished the war with 7 confirmed victories. He remained in the Marine Corps until 1965, retiring as a colonel. In retirement, McClure wrote about the technological changes he had witnessed. He emphasized that while the Mark 18 made deflection shooting far more reliable, it never made aerial combat safe or simple. The sight removed one variable from the fight, but countless others remained: altitude control, energy management, situational awareness, tactical placement. A pilot with a perfect sight could still be outmaneuvered, outclimbed, or surprised by an adversary he never detected. The story of the Mark 18 ends not with dramatic finales but with gradual evolution into more advanced systems. As jets replaced propeller-driven fighters in the 1950s, new electronic fire control systems supplanted gyroscopic gunsights. The Mark 18 did not suddenly fail or become useless, it simply became outdated as faster aircraft and longer ranges required more sophisticated solutions. Some Mark 18 sights remained on Corsairs providing close air support in Korea. Others were placed in storage or scrapped as airframes were retired. A few were preserved in museums, where they remain as tangible reminders of a time when mechanical computing represented state-of-the-art technology. The Mark 18's legacy survives not in the physical devices, now museum artifacts, but in the principles they proved and the technological lineage they launched. Every modern fire control computer, no matter how sophisticated, traces its conceptual ancestry to devices like the Mark 18 that first solved the fundamental problem of automated aiming. The engineers who worked on the Mark 18 contributed knowledge far beyond their immediate project. They demonstrated that complex calculations could be carried out mechanically with enough reliability for combat use. They proved human-machine interfaces could be designed for effective operation under extreme stress. They showed that advanced equipment could be produced at scale and maintained under harsh field conditions. The pilots who employed the Mark 18 contributed their own legacy. They tested the technology in combat, provided crucial feedback, and developed tactics that exploited the sight's strengths. Most importantly, they proved that humans could cooperate effectively with automated systems, neither becoming completely dependent on technology nor dismissing it as unnecessary. This balanced approach to human-machine teamwork remains relevant today as automation spreads into new domains. The Mark 18 gyroscopic gunsight deserves remembrance not because it was revolutionary or because it single-handedly altered the Pacific War, but because it represents the less glamorous yet essential work of solving practical problems effectively. In an age that often idolizes breakthrough innovations, the Mark 18 reminds us that incremental improvements, when applied systematically and at scale, often matter more than dramatic inventions that cannot be produced or deployed efficiently. The device succeeded because it was practical, durable, and sufficiently effective. These traits, while not glamorous, define technology that genuinely affects real-world outcomes. The story of the Mark 18 is ultimately the story of people solving problems. Engineers designed it. Workers assembled it. Logistics crews delivered it. Maintainers kept it functioning. Pilots used it. Commanders integrated it into successful operations. Each group contributed essential elements. Without any one of them, the program would have faltered. This collective effort, more than any single individual's brilliance, shaped the outcome. The final assessment of the Mark 18's impact must acknowledge both documented facts and lingering uncertainties. Official records confirm that the device was produced in large numbers, equipped numerous Corsair and Hellcat units during 1944-45, and earned positive evaluations from pilots. Combat reports show improved accuracy and shorter engagement times for units equipped with Gyro sights. Pilot testimony consistently describes the Mark 18 as a significant improvement over reflector sights for deflection shooting. What cannot be precisely measured is the exact statistical boost in kill ratios directly attributable to the sight versus other factors such as pilot experience, tactical development, or declining Japanese pilot quality. 11-to-1 overall Corsair kill ratio reflects performance across the whole war and includes both sight types. What remains clear is that the Mark 18 represented a meaningful advance in fire control technology that offered practical advantages to the pilots who used it. It showcased American industrial capacity, technological ingenuity, and systematic problem-solving. In an era when air combat was shifting from individual skill to integrated technological systems, the Mark 18 marked an important step toward the automated weapons that would shape post-war aviation. The Mark 18 worked because it functioned reliably under combat conditions, could be manufactured in sufficient quantities, and could be operated effectively without extensive specialized training. These practical factors mattered more than theoretical elegance. The sight was designed to solve a specific problem, hitting maneuvering targets at high speed, and it solved that problem well enough to remain in service through the Korean War. For the Corsair pilots of 1945, the Mark 18 was simply a useful tool that made a difficult job slightly more manageable. It did not remove danger or guarantee survival, but it improved their odds in a deadly environment where margins were narrow and outcomes uncertain. In the broader technological narrative, the Mark 18 stands as a transitional device. It bridged the age of instinctive World War II dogfighting and the coming era of radar-guided missiles. It demonstrated that machines could perform calculations faster and more reliably than human minds, an idea that would eventually reshape aviation and far more. The pilots who witnessed this change understood they were seeing a technological revolution unfold. The story of Japan never expecting Gyro sights to make Corsair pilots remarkably accurate is the story of technology meeting necessity, engineering meeting combat, and innovation meeting implementation. It shows how American industrial power and systematic problem-solving reshaped aerial warfare in the Pacific, one spinning gyroscope at a time.